Namaskar. It's my great pleasure to be with you tonight. I don't know if I have your floor, but at least I'm with you in spirit. The topic is the power of storytelling to change the world. This, of course, is a photo of Greta Thunberg from Sweden, who at the age of 16 became world famous as a leader of the climate change activist movement. Stories have moved us since the dawn of time. They're one of the main ways that we communicated. They allow us to fulfill a profound human need to understand the patterns of living in an emotional way. How do we live in the world? How do we get by? How do we live with others? Why does your story matter? The famous phrase, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. When you tell a story, you convey how much you care. Your compassion is infectious. Why is it important to learn how to tell your story? I think you have certainly in your lifetime listened to stories that were boring. When the person is telling so many details and going on and on way too long, that's not inspiring. But you can learn how to tell your story in a most powerful way. Everyone has a compelling story that can move others. So our goal is to learn how to tell your story so that listeners respond with me too. I want to also be a part of that. This is a group of Proutists in Portugal, the Master Unit, Ananda Kalyani. Ivan Illich was a Catholic priest, a philosopher from Austria. And he wrote Deschooling Society. He wrote, neither revolution nor reformation can ultimately change a society. Rather, you must tell a new, powerful tale, one so persuasive that it sweeps away the old myths and becomes the preferred story. One so inclusive that it gathers all the bits of our past and our present into a coherent whole. One that even shines some light into the future so that we can take the next step. If you want to change a society, then you have to tell an alternative story. I want to change a society. Let's tell an alternative story. These words by Malcolm X, revolutionary African-American leader. We are not outnumbered, we are out-organized, meaning the masses of the people of the world want to make a better world, but they're not organized enough to overcome powers that be. They're preventing them from changing the world, preventing all of us from changing the world. This is a question that plagued me all during my youth. What's wrong with being very rich? And I would like now to tell you why this plagued me so much. My first 10 years growing up were happy ones. I lived in the suburbs of New Jersey. Then my family moved to Gainesville, Florida. Back then, that was still the deep South. I had to go to a segregated, all-white J.J. Finley Elementary School, named for a Confederate general, where I was a damn Yankee. Can you imagine what it felt like to be in a school with only white kids? Knowing that somewhere there was another school, much shabbier, where all Black and Latino kids had to go. My family also joined a segregated all-white country club and a segregated all-white Presbyterian church. In 1967, I was about to start high school when my father, a child psychiatrist, got a job heading that department at Ohio State University Medical School in Columbus, Ohio. So my family moved to the wealthy suburb of Upper Arlington, Ohio. At that time, the population was 50,000 white people. You see, the real estate agents refused to sell any house to any person of any color. This racist discrimination was called redlining, and it was done because the rich people were afraid that their homes would lose value if a person of another race lived nearby. In 1968, the Fair Housing Act made that practice illegal, but it was several years later before the first people of color entered that suburb. Going to all-white Upper Arlington High School made me very uncomfortable. Sometimes I went to the Presbyterian church because I longed to connect to a higher power. But what I saw in the church parking lot disturbed me. Many very expensive luxury cars were parked there. After an hour, their well-dressed owners got back in and drove off. I felt it must somehow be wrong. But what's wrong with being very rich? I couldn't think of an answer. I left that town to go to Earlham College, a Quaker school in Richmond, Indiana, that taught us to follow our conscience. The Vietnam War was raging. Everything I read about it convinced me that war is not a good way to solve international conflicts. One night, in my dorm window, I burned my draft card. The next morning, I sent a letter to the government office informing them that I had just broken the law and I would not obey it anymore because I did not believe the Vietnam War was just. A friend went to federal prison for 2 years for doing just that. But I was never prosecuted because by then the government bureaucracy was flooded with 500,000 other draft resistors. In college, I took several courses in African American studies. I learned about the Black experience, and I learned that everyone is biased to some extent. I invited Ernie Thurkel, a very smart Black athletic student, to be my roommate. We're still friends 50 years later. In our dorm room, I hung a United States flag upside down, a universal symbol of distress and trouble. I also hung a poster with the words from the revolutionary Che Guevara. At the risk of sounding ridiculous, I would say that the true revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love. That's what I want to be, I thought. I want to change the world as fast as possible, but I want to do it with love. I love my classes. I love the people in the college. But after 2 years, a disturbing thought arose. I am too comfortable and privileged here. There's a world out there that I need to experience. I have to quit college, even though my parents will no longer give me any financial support. I took that scary leap, and for 2 years I hitchhiked around the country and worked minimum wage jobs in different cities. When I was 21, I learned yoga and meditation. There I found the answer to the question that had troubled me. What's wrong with being very rich? The ancient principle of yoga ethics is to not selfishly accumulate more than you need. This astounded me. Here at last was a logical reason why it was morally and ecologically wrong to selfishly become as rich as possible. Mahatma Gandhi said, the world has enough for everyone's needs, but not for everyone's greed. Today, most scientists would agree that greed is destroying our planet because all the resources are limited and we need to conserve and preserve them. As I began my spiritual journey, I started to hear other kinds of stories. I heard amazing accounts of incredible coincidences, of miraculous cures, stories of spiritual ecstasy, of the one who's all-knowing with infinite supernatural powers, who's everywhere at the same time. These stories defied logic and suspended my belief. They told that there's an invisible consciousness that watches us always, knows our secrets and all our mistakes, and yet still loves us unconditionally. They said, the force that guides the stars guides you too. Accepting that spiritual view, even as just a possibility, was powerful and transformative. I was initiated 50 years ago on September 29th, 1974 in New Orleans. Prakash, the host on this call, was touring with the Acharya, and he told me there was also a social philosophy called Prout, the progressive utilization theory. Those few words gave me hope that we can somehow save our planet and save humanity. I started to read the few small books that were available about Prout, and it sounded logical and practical and based on love. I resolved to follow the words I saw on my wall during college and become a revolutionary for Prout, guided by great feelings of love. Yoga psychology later taught me that selfishness and greed are negative instincts that we all have, like anger and hatred, but we need to control them. 1,000 years ago, if you got angry at someone, you might well draw your swords and settle your disagreement that way. Today, though, in every one of the 195 countries in the world, there are laws to prevent violence. But we don't yet have laws to prevent greed. Capitalism, in its drive for profit, encourages greed. A famous line in the movie Wall Street was, "Greed is good. The media tells us that the richest people are heroes of society, not because of anything they've done, but just because they're super rich. Yet I've read stories about some of the very rich people who are not very good, and some are not very happy. Millions of people in this country and around the world are poor because they can't find decent work that pays a living wage. The worst part is that many poor people think that somehow it's their fault. It's not. It's the system. As I learned all this about the terrible effect that greed has on the planet and humanity, I decided I had to do something about it. But what? I decided to become a monk. Why? In part, to set an example with my own life that you don't need a lot of money to be happy. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, and I don't buy hardly anything except food and orange clothes sometimes. Yet every day I feel more peace, more love, and more happiness than I dreamed was possible. I wouldn't trade what I do for anything in the world. In part two, I became a monk to work for a better world, where we set reasonable limits on income, wealth, and land ownership, where no one is hungry or poor. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit more and then allow you to tell your stories. Why don't people work to change the world? There's this wall in front of people, and it's made up of these different things: inertia, self-doubt, fear, isolation, and apathy. All of these are reasons not to do anything. Values inspire action through emotion. YCMAD stands for You Can Make a Difference. The media doesn't teach that. They teach only the President of the United States can make any difference in the world. It's not true. Actually, every positive change in America has happened because the people pressed the president for civil rights legislation to end redlining, the Fair Housing Act, and all the other positive things that presidents do. It's because of the people. Solidarity, working together. Anger, righteous anger at injustice. Why are 9 million people dying of hunger every year? 3 million of them children dying of hunger when there's more than enough food on our planet Earth, according to the United Nations, to feed everybody. Why it's not our priority? It must be our priority. Urgency, we have to act now. We can't wait until everyone is dead. We have to do it now. And hope. Your stories have to bring hope to people. Unless people have hope, they won't cross that wall. So action comes from these You can make a difference: solidarity, anger, urgency, and hope. Three basic elements of a story. First, the challenge. Was it a mountain you decided to climb, or a hole you managed to climb out of? Why did you feel it was a challenge? What was so hard about it? Traumas that are overcome can inspire us. So, what was your challenge? Second, what was your choice? Why did you make the choice that you did? Where did you get the courage to make that choice? Where did you find the hope? How did it feel? And finally, the outcome. How did the outcome feel? Why did it feel that way? What did it teach you? What do you want to teach us? How do you want us to feel? So the three elements of a story: the challenge, the choice you made, and the outcome. I'd like to talk a little bit about stereotypes, racism, sexism. How can you work with that in stories? First, we need to understand there's a continuum, okay? On the left, you have generalizations. We make generalizations that the people in Mexico are more or less like this. Stereotypes can become prejudices and biases, excluding behaviors, and if you have power, even discriminating against people. You need to understand that we all have biases. Becoming aware of our biases makes it possible to manage our biases before we act on them. So how do we do that with stories? We can use stories to bring awareness. What stereotypes might your audience hold about your topic? For example, Russians. How do people feel about Russians? Devananda, Devapriya, I believe in Romania. She says she was working with high school students there, and she talked about the problem of racism in America. They all understood that was very bad. Think badly about black people, African American people. Everybody had heard about that. Everybody knew about that. And then she said, well, what about the gypsy people, the Roma people here? Oh, they're really bad. They could not see that they had really adopted the stereotypes, the very negative stereotypes, that they were all thieves, dishonest, dirty, all these terrible stereotypes they had adopted. And they thought they were all true. That was just the way it was. How can you open the people's minds without putting them down or yourself above them? What biases maybe that you can admit to? How can you do so without treading into awkwardness, fragility, hurting your credibility? So you can admit to something, for example, a bias that you used to have, so that they can also see. How are you connected to and like the thing that you want to change? How much do you know about your country, really? How little I knew about something before. So, I came back to this country after 40 years overseas, and I joined the Toastmasters Club 7 years ago. And 3 years ago, I joined professional storytelling, group of professional story that meets every week. I'm frankly embarrassed to say how much I've improved in these last few years, because I've been teaching for 50 years, and you think I would have learned all this a long time ago. But practicing, there's a lot more. So I'm continuing. Here are examples that you can use to tell stories. You can tell the story about a time when I was younger and was conditioned to believe something that I don't believe now. You can tell a story about a time when I got it wrong, a time when I made a mistake about this topic, and who or what set me straight. You can tell about a time when I didn't know something, and then later I learned that. These are all ways to tell stories about racism, about sexism, in a way that can bring awareness to your listeners without attacking them directly. Finally, you want to tell your personal story. Why do you want to build a better world? Choose one event, one place, or one important relationship. Decide the challenge, your choice, and the outcome in this story from your life.
Well, I think there's another application that's important. Many of us have been in situations where we appear before city councils or elected officials. And my experience is usually you're very limited. You've got 2 minutes or you've got 3 minutes to say what you have to say. And so you really have to perfect what you're going to say to really get the, salient points across to whomever the audience is. So again, it's another area where many people in the future will be talking to their city council or talking to their members, of elected bodies, and being able to do that's vitally important.
Sure.
Alex has a question or comment.
So first of all, I want to thank Dada Maheshvarananda for being here tonight to share some of himself and some of his passion for storytelling, of what she's gotten pretty darn good at recently. It kind of reminds me, one of the things in the kind of the activist community that we're encouraged to do is to know your own story and to be sharing it and connecting it in an elevator speech fashion to specific issues linked to policy, so that you can be more authentic and convincing when sharing your story and the impact of changing the policy in the right direction can have. The whole purpose is to humanize the contact of that. No longer are issues some abstract idea. These are real people feeling real hardships or really impacted by these measures. This is the whole strategy for how social movements operate, is by gaining connection through the authenticity of storytelling. And
Sure.
I think Dada has given us quite a glimpse of that tonight. So thank you.